Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for this talk on adaptive ski and mountain access. For those who are joining later or can't make it, this session will be recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel after. My name is Jenny. I'm a medical student here at Southwestern, and on behalf of the Adaptive Sports Coalition, I have the pleasure of introducing tonight's speakers for the education series, Dr. Austin Henke, who will be on in a second, and Dr. Mason Tincher. So just a brief introduction, Dr. Henke is an early career physiatrist who sees an assortment of diagnoses, including people with spinal cord injuries and limb loss at Baylor Dallas. He has a special and long-term focus of adaptive sports for all. And Dr. Tincher is a PGY2 PM&R resident at Baylor University Med Center. He is interested in brain injury medicine and adaptive sports, and he wants to share that he was able to attend this year's Baylor Adaptive Sports trip to Crested Butte, Colorado, which sounds awesome, and I'm sure you can share about that. So we're super grateful for both of them for joining us tonight. And with that, I will hand the floor over to you, Dr. Tincher.
Thank you so much, and I'm very happy to be here. I know Dr. Hinkie is as well. I've worked really closely with Dr. Hinkie this year, kind of as a PGY2 over here at Baylor in Dallas, and it's a great opportunity. And I'm very thankful for him, Dr. Hamilton, and then Dr. Wilson, all for kind of giving us an opportunity as like PGY2s to be able to go on these adaptive trips. So we have one that does a TBI trip in the fall, and then we had the kind of adaptive sports in the spring. So really great, and I'm very appreciative. I'm going to just share my slides real quick, so excuse the slight intermission. Go. Are you able to see the slides okay?
Yes, I think so. Is it just the flyer that's up right now?
It should show up, yes. So that's Dr. Hinkie, so you can get familiarized with his face once he gets logged on. I apologize for the inconvenience. And so we were part of the adaptive sports trip this spring to Crested Butte with Dr. Hamilton, who is one of the program directors over here at Baylor Dallas. And we were the three physicians who went on the team. We're accompanied usually by prosthetists, so one from Sablich and one from Hanger, as well, that we have an opportunity to travel with our group. When we're hopeful to expand to maybe physical therapists, occupational therapists in the future to kind of keep building. On our trip this year, we were able to take uh, uh, amputees and spinal cord injuries. In the past, we've taken amputee spinal cord injury and traumatic brain injuries. So that's usually the population. Dr. Hinkie and Dr. Hamilton are both specialized in spinal cord injury, and then Dr. Hinkie has a special interest in amputations and does our gait clinic. So it's mostly the population that Dr. Hamilton and Dr. Hinkie see in clinic that kind of have this opportunity, but we're hopeful to expand as our program grows and all those kind of things. So we can try to get started. From my side, I have Dr. Hinkie's slides here, so I'll skip over those and we can just kind of start on my section. So we're here to talk about adaptive sports, featuring some really great people. So I'm super excited to share this. This is our group and kind of Crested Butte on the back end, and so Dr. Hamilton there on the end and I. And then this is our group of athletes that we got to take on our trip. So a really great opportunity. Family is also welcome as well. Definitely if they're caregivers. So to help some of the athletes be able to perform at their highest ability and really make the experience super great. Here's some just pictures I took of Crested Butte. It's a really pretty area of Colorado, kind of central. Telluride's pretty close as well. It's kind of hard to see, but the mountain's about 12,000 feet, so quite high. And so from being from the East Coast, it was a big change from where I grew up skiing on about 3,000 to 5,000, going up to 12,000. So a really great opportunity. And so Crescent Butte Adaptive Spinner is where we were. It's a fully fledged therapeutic recreational program, operates year-round for adaptive activities such as mountain biking, skiing, paddleboarding, ice climbing, kayaking. It services about 6,000 athletes a year. and has about over like 600 different activities that they offer. So it's a pretty large center. And people come from all over the US, but they come all over the world too to be able to come to this facility. So we're very blessed that they're willing to have us every year. This is the Kelsey Wright building. This is the adaptive center that we were able to stay in. Kind of where it's lit up there on the top is where they have like their built-in kind of dormitory styles with bathrooms, a full kitchen, kind of a rec area, and it houses all the athletes, their families, and all the a wonderful staff that's able to come to. Just some of the general statistics, about 90% of individuals feel like their adaptive experience had a very positive influence on just them feeling very empowered in their lives. And 95% felt that their experiences were just really help overall satisfaction in our lives. So these individuals, they've gone through a lot. Big changes, most of them very sudden, from a car accident, motor vehicle accident to just a fall. And so kind of empowering them is one of the big goals of this trip and one of the big goals of this center. It takes both acquired and congenital disabilities to try to be able to come and kind of experience this and a wide variety of different diagnoses, conditions. Um, and so from our group, some of the things that we kind of heard during our trip and I think was really powerful was, people thought they'd never be able to ski again, never be able to ski with their kids again. And, this facility gave them the opportunity. And the goal of our program is you come with us this one time, and then after that, we really try to empower people to come back in the future by themselves, so that they can come back to this facility. It doesn't have to be with a set trip, and set up this kind of recreation, bring your family, stay in the town, and use the adaptive center and the trainers and everything to kind of help build this. And then one of the big things is true. A lot of people have never tried skiing or snowboarding before this trip. Coming from Texas, it's not necessarily a common sport here. So people are wanting to keep trying new things, exploring, and I think that's one of the wonderful things that we can offer with kind of adaptive sports. And, when the kind of group asked the individual who said this, which one do you prefer, skiing or snowboarding? They said snowboarding. And of course, it's cute, all the snowboard hates. For anyone that skis, it's always a big back and forth between the groups. So it's quite enjoyable. And there was challenges. I personally had a challenge. One of the things I usually face when I ski, and I had it this time as too, is I usually get ski boot syndrome. And so it's kind of a syndrome that irritates the peroneal nerve, kind of. So I always tighten my boot too tight. This is not the boot. So if you're a head fan for sports, please forgive me. It was just a good picture that kind of showed how the boot tightens around. So, there's challenges you face on the trip as well. And this is one of the personal ones I had to face. But thankfully, I could just untighten my boot on the lift and go. Some things that we all take from the trip, a lot of people said they learned how to ski as a kid, but now they're able to ski with their nieces. And this really allowed them to connect with that like childhood experience again, something they kind of thought they wouldn't be able to. And one of the other individuals, it was a kind of a really profound statement. It says, like, I've never been around people with disabilities before, and this kind of opened him up to a community. And he had a very sudden loss of a limb, and much later in his life. And he really just didn't have this experience and have a community around him, and he felt kind of alone. So going on this trip, I think it really was something powerful for him. And so this is kind of a little bit of the community that we kind of built, an amputation, one of our spinal cord injuries, one of the family members. And so kind of the ups and then kind of the downs of the trip. So it's a fun experience, but it's hard. Skiing's hard. It takes a lot of work, and that's something that was really fun about the trip is people got to experience something completely different, things that they weren't used to. And for some of the people who have skied at different points in their life before their injuries, it's a very different the way we kind of ski afterwards. And so why this kind of all exists? We talked a lot about what people were experiencing, what I experienced, what others experience, but really the idea of an adaptive sports center is to enrich people's lives with disabilities through kind of going out and doing these outdoor activities. Really, it's to create a world of accessibility, and make people feel celebrated, embraced and that includes the families, that includes the communities that this involves. One of the things that's really great about Crested Butte is it has had an adaptive center for many, many years. And so many people in the mountain really understand all the different customs and things that allow, and a lot of the people who are so kindly working the lifts and stuff really understand that sometimes we need to go a little slower, or we need to speed up, or really take a lot of cues from the wonderful workers at the Adaptive Center, and they make it very inclusive for all, because it's just a little bit harder, and there's a little bit more that goes into it sometimes. And as anyone who skis knows, that lift is usually the worst part. And so really having a community that kind of embraces that, and understanding that sometimes we'll have to make some minor adjustments to the routine, the day, the line, really does make it really exceptional. So we're really thankful, as well. And this is just one of the pictures I got to take on the mountain. It's a really beautiful area. Um, and it's, quite a large. And so it does help that adaptive athletes have a little bit more room to kind of ski and kind of maneuver, because turning can be quite hard. And you really kind of have to lean into it, as you'll see a little bit later into the presentation, into the conditions. So this is just one of the photos I kind of took. And, going, since this is kind of a medical presentation, I try to throw in a little bit of medicine just for the fun of it. So, you always hear, like, when you get up high in the mountains, like the air is a lot thinner. And to me, it kind of looks a little thinner in my picture, the sky gets a little different color of blue. But what does that really mean? So, it kind of starting to think, what does this mean? So when you're getting up, at higher altitudes, definitely above 8,000 feet, there are certain medical conditions that become more evident. And so, when you get up higher, it's not the lack of oxygen, that the oxygen gets thinner. It's really the partial pressure of the oxygen, which really drives the diffusion cascade, of oxygen in the lungs, and in the body. And it doesn't change the proportion of the air that's composed of oxygen, which is about 21%. That remains all the way up to the upper troposphere. But this really does create an environment that can set up people for, some medical conditions. And that's one of the reasons that, having a lot of people that maybe haven't had this experience before now have new medical conditions with maybe sensitive autonomic dysreflexia, autonomic dysfunctions. Having some medical team there to kind of see how people adapt can be really important. And so these are kind of the ones that we've experienced, and which are the most common. So high altitude sickness. So we're saying about 9,000 feet, above sea level. And a lot of this starts about 7 to 8,000 for most people. Some people are more sensitive than others. In Texas, we're quite low, so we don't really get very much acclimation to this, kind of altitude. And so the most common is kind of, acute mountain sickness, and then high altitude cerebral edema, and then high altitude pulmonary edema. We've gone for 3 years, on this trip, pretty consistently with residents, and we've had all three. With our athletes or other personnel that's been on the trip. So it's not as, infrequent as we would hope. We'd hope a lot less frequent than it has been for us. So kind of understanding what are the possibilities and how do we kind of cope with them for people who are a little bit more sensitive. So one of the conditions, kind of the most common, it usually starts within about 6 to 12 hours of arrival, and commonly about 7 to 8,000 feet is when you start to see it. It's acute mountain sickness. A lot of times, when you read like up to date things, it feels like a hangover. Is kind of what they say, because the symptoms are usually like headache, fatigue, lightheadedness, dizziness. Sometimes a lack of appetite, difficult staying asleep. For me, that was something I experienced. I am normally a pretty good sleeper, and it was like every 2 or 3 hours I would wake up for like an hour and a half, just because I just couldn't sleep very well the whole entire trip. And I was quite tired after skiing, so it was just something new, and that's nothing I've faced before when I've skied on the East Coast at a much lower altitude. Sometimes nausea and vomiting will also so kind of that hangover, as they say, it kind of fits into this description. Really, how you avoid it is you just ascend kind of slowly. So if you can, taking a slow trip. We always recommend stopping for a while, stopping overnight, halfway up the mountain as you get a little higher. And if you're more sensitive, try to go down as well. Some treatment options, kind of as we talked about. So, kind of symptom management, ibuprofen for the headache, so Fran for nausea, vomiting, as long as you don't have any contraindications. Descend about 1,300 to 2,600 feet or more is usually the most recommended. And then supplemental oxygen for people that need oxygen or have had this before. Sometimes your physician can actually write for like a canister or some type of converter. And there's actually just supplies companies on the mountains really commonly in a lot of places. But unfortunately, last minute, it's kind of hard to find. So, kind of pre-planning sometimes can be really useful. And then treatment options, preventative medicine. So, something like Diamox can increase your work of it can increase your work of breathing through causing acidosis. And then the next option, if you can't really tolerate Diamox, would be dexamethasone. We actually had a patient, well, not a patient, one of our participants that actually was on Diamox before. They've had pretty serious events on the mountain before. And so they pre-medicated this time, the time before they didn't, and it was unfortunately an ER hospital visit. And so they came prepared this time. So we really appreciated that. And that's one of the things we kind of really prep people for as well before the trip to try to set them up the right doctors, referrals, things like that, if they are more sensitive, have had issues before. Um, and the next one is high altitude cerebral edema. This is kind of like instead of a hangover, you're thinking more like acting drunk, that you kind of see in up to date and resources like that. So it's more like severe exhaustion, weakness, and there's usually a progressive decline in consciousness. You get really drowsy, confused, irritable, and then people will even start to get a difficulty with like an ataxic gait, so walking straight. So this is what they kind of mean when they're acting drunk. It's this kind of fatigue stuff that really starts to come on. It happens a little bit higher, usually about 1900, 9,800 feet is typically when you start to see this come on, but it can happen at lower levels as well. And it's a life-threatening altitude disease. And this actually happened to one of the athletes, not my year, thankfully, but a couple years ago. And they ended up going to the hospital and were actually transferred to a larger medical center and then came back to the mountain after getting cleared and then happened again. And so people can be quite sensitive to this. And this is something that's happened just in our 3 years of taking about 8 people on our trips that are kind of patients. So it is definitely a possibility and something you just have to have a little bit of knowledge or a little background in that this is a possibility for people. And it's a possibility for not only the patients that we're going with, but ourselves. So picking up these signs in anyone and everyone can be really important. Um, and kind of treatment options for this is really immediate descent to a lower altitude, is really the recommended. If you can't descend, what do you do? Supplemental oxygen, portable hyperbaric chambers. In this kind of setting where we can easily descend down the mountain, it's not as useful. But if you think like Everest, places like that, they usually do take these portable hyperbaric chambers to really allow. And then in those chambers, you can add supplemental oxygen as well. And then dexamethasone can be useful. Oh, that was the wrong way. As well, that we kind of talked about earlier, to kind of help treat this if you just can't descend. Thankfully, on this kind of trip, you can, or the mountain is kind of set up right on the top, and there's an easy road and a bus system that runs about every 20 minutes, that takes you to about 2,000 feet lower. And then the next one we can kind of talk about in this group was like high altitude pulmonary edema. So I couldn't really hook this to the kind of hangover, acting drunk pathway, so forgive me, but. Maybe if you aspirate, we can get there a little bit, but we'll try to avoid all of that. But these symptoms are more like cough. often like a pink frothy sputum, and then it kind of progresses to like a frank blood. You get mildly dyspneic with activities, and it just slowly progresses. And it progresses to rest, and then severe dyspnea with activity, and then severe dyspnea rest. And this typically happens about 2 to 4 days into your trip at arriving at altitude. So it's much more a slow kind of onset, but can be very, very serious. And we always take adults. We're an adult primary group. But kids can have this too. And one of the things, if you're in more in the pediatric PM&R world, or really any medical world where you take care of more of a pediatric population, young kids can manifest in a very different way. And it could be more increased pallor, cyanosis, and then just a kind of a depression of consciousness. And so you have to realize that adult populations might act very different. And then when you take kids or when you're in a pediatric group, and so just keeping that always in the back of the mind as well can be really important. And this is actually one of the CTs of someone that was on our group. So we had this one the year before, and this was the participant that it came back this next year, and they were the ones that did the Diamox as well, and they had no issues. This person previously had been at high altitudes up in Brackenridge for many times and had this actually happen before and had pre-medicated quite a few times. So then this trip, they just kind of got behind the game, kind of forgot because it'd been a few years. And then they got onto the trip and developed a pretty serious, ended up getting on BiPAP, the positive pressure. Thankfully, no intubation, just kind of got to a lower level. BiPAP helped push the fluid out and some oxygen and everything kind of helped set them up for success. But it was another ambulance to the hospital kind of trip as well that we hopefully try to avoid and thankfully did not have on our trip this year. I don't know if I was the good luck or it was just a good year for everything, but thankfully we didn't have any big medical emergencies other than just kind of the acute mountain sickness. But treatment for this preventative is nifedipine, kind of a calcium channel blocker. It helps reduce some of the vascular pressure, really in the pulmonary arteries, systemic resistance, body pressure. So it can be really useful. And the patient that was pre-medicating had that CT scan the previous year. They were on the Diamox, but they were also on nifedipine. So they double medicated for this trip as well. Sildenafil is another option as well, helps kind of augment the effects of nitric oxide and kind of reduces the vasoconstriction and the hypertension and kind of this kind of pulmonary event. Besides descending, what are kind of the other options? It's supplemental oxygen, as we talked about by PAP, so it's positive airway pressure, and then the portable hyperbarics. Definitely, if you're on a much higher where you really just physically cannot descend, that's also a good option for this. And so those are kind of the common ones that we saw. On our trip this year, we had the common like respiratory viruses, flu-like symptoms, things like that, as well. But these are the ones we kind of look at for kind of the altitude portion, because how this trip can be different from other trips, camping, other things like that. One of the things I thought was really interesting, kind of when I was doing my research, and then how people kind of reacted on the hill. It's like, what should you do if you drink caffeine regularly before you go, and what should you do while you're on the trip? And one of the things is, caffeine is safe at higher altitudes. And if you stop it suddenly because you're like, oh, it's maybe I shouldn't drink, or you're maybe I shouldn't drink a bunch of coffee because I'm not feeling super well. It actually, if you stop suddenly, it causes symptoms very similar to acute mountain sickness. So it actually can make your symptoms much worse and really cloud the picture. So it's usually recommended if you're drinking caffeine prior to going, continuing that while you're on the mountain. So having your coffee, or as in my case, I'm a big Dr. Pepper fiend. So I had to keep my Dr. Pepper habit up. But that was just something I thought was really interesting. And conversations we actually had on the mountain, I was like, I'm not quite for sure. I never really thought about it before. So just something that was interesting. But we're talking about other people's experiences. All the negative things can happen, but what kind of was this trip, and what was the kind of the point of this trip? And a lot of it is um, we were going adaptive skiing, snowboarding, and doing kind of these winter sports. And what is adaptive skiing? It's a modification of a skiing technique, equipment, and training to allow people with disabilities, including amputees, paraplegics. We've taken multiple higher tetras as well. Um, Prior to this, we take double amputees above, below knee. Um, and so we take a pretty wide variety. One of our patients actually had a TBI and a amputation due to their accident. Thankfully, the TBI has progressed and is doing very well and is very independent. But that's kind of the population we primarily go with because of Dr. Hamilton and Dr. Henke. And we really appreciate their clinic to find some really great participants and can really pinpoint people as well. Um, so kind of going to skiing, there's a couple different types. So sit skiing or stand up. So in sit skiing, there's mono skiing and bi skiing. So it really means kind of that the ski on the bottom of the chair. So you're sitting down in kind of like a chair like seat. And then it has either one ski or two skis under it. And it's really set for people who really can't stand or maintain balance for extended periods of time. Mono skiing, just the one ski, it really offers greater maneuverability on the mountain, but it does require a lot more strength and coordination. So you can think maybe a mono ski might be a little bit better for maybe a paraplegic that has a little bit more control, has their arm function, but compared to bi-skiing, that maybe someone that has some tetraplegia or that has a little less control, needs a little bit more stability, might be a little bit more set. And then some are other ones, if you have, different SEI patterns or amputation, stand-up skiing. So modifications to allow people with amputation, spinal cord injuries to ski while standing. Um, and so those are kind of the big two, or big three that we kind of really focused on our trip. So this is kind of a picture of a monoski. And so you can see the Kelsey Wright building down there kind of at the very corner. So it's right, you can ski right out onto the slopes, right onto the lift. So it's very, very user friendly. Definitely for patients that may struggle with kind of that push on flatter ground. It really helps set you up for success there. So this is one of our mono skis. They have some outriggers in their hands that we'll talk about. And then one of the guides, they have a little like tether that kind of helps control. Definitely on the first few days, this is very common. Helps rein, it kind of attaches to the back of the ski just to allow them to control the speed and things like that. And then we have in the orange vest, a wonderful volunteer that allows us to kind of have some more open range, and they'll kind of point to which way the participant's going so people behind us can really understand kind of how we're maneuvering down the hill. So it really sets us up for success and make sure there's no other injuries. So how we fly on a weekend. And then Monday it really starts. So kind of starting off Monday morning is when it starts. So we start in the workroom. I have quite a few videos, but I think for time I won't go too much into these, but um it puts you in this kind of room. You can see all the different types of monoskis, biskis, and then they kind of set you up for each patient. So they're adjusting for a specific patient and kind of setting that for the whole week. It can make adjustments on the hill in the room kind of every day, but you kind of set yourself up with a certain setup that first day. So you get down there about 30 minutes earlier to kind of test everything out and get started. And then kind of selection of the equipment. So some of these guides really know their stuff. And so right there, he's putting on one of the outriggers. So really with the outrigger, you're wanting about a 90-degree arm bend. And that's really important because that's what's kind of stabilizing you. That's what's helping you steer because you have one on both arms. They can be kind of attached where they're just kind of loose, or for some patients, you actually have to wrap them that don't have the greatest hand control. There is slight danger with that because it can get stuck behind you. But it's less common. And usually that's why we have guides. You're going slower and really trying to work up a good technique. Just like much when you ski, you don't fall with your hands stretched out. Or snowboarding. So it's just kind of learning those simple things can be really useful. And one of the things they really talked about was the kind of these outriggers is sometimes the new proprioception. So, it's no longer your feet and spinal cord injuries or maybe an amputation. Um, you're losing that sense of where your body is in position, movement, orientation in space because you've had nerve damage, you had a loss of that limb. And so these are really giving you biofeedback into a part of your body where you can understand how you're moving, how you're turning, and kind of how you're adjusting now. And so that was something I never really thought about before, but I thought was really, really interesting. And then kind of the dump, like what does that mean? It's kind of how he sits in that chair. And by increasing the dump, you really get the legs closer to the core, and to the chest. And so it's used in a lot of people that maybe are a little higher up with so upper thoracics have reduced core strength, maybe a tetra. So you can get better maneuverability and don't need to rely as much on your abdominal muscles, your back, to kind of help you maneuver. And so it helps, and then it helps you kind of get up from a fall too when you have that kind of weakness. So all these things are kind of working on day one to really set these patients or athletes up for success.
Right off the rack like that, so we'll adjust as we.
And then there's lessons on the slopes, and so you're constantly doing this. And so I'll play this one real quick.
Allow that hip to go in instead of out. Because I want to show you here. You got yourself for a second? Yeah. I just want you to see what happens to my skis and the edges, right? So we all have edges on there. Yeah. And if we roll onto the edges, I just want you to watch what happens. Like, even if I can't tell my hips what to do here, if I dive in with my shoulders to my left turn, where does it push my hip?
Over to the right.
And what does it do to my edges?
It lifts the right edge up.
Flattens them.
Yeah.
And so these kind of lessons were just happening. This was our first run, and so these lessons are kind of happening by a trained guide that has done this for many years. But it's different. It's a different kind of thought process of how you're skiing, how she's skiing. So really understanding the differences and having these lessons every kind of run, mid-run, that can really set people up for success is really so useful. And then kind of she was talking about how you can catch your edge. So what happens when you catch your edge? So this is kind of it's not uncommon to fall. It's very, very common, definitely when you're learning for anyone. And so kind of not both days away. So this is how we were talking about that not going to be very helpful. Make sure you have a good arm bend because in this situation, he's not pulling himself up. They're kind of helping him, but he can actually help push himself. And so, and a lot of people, they end up progressing pretty quickly where they don't have two-person assist, or maybe they have someone that really couldn't physically assist. So how would they be able to get up? So having that kind of orientation very first day on a Monday, and really setting people up for the right equipment really sets people up for success, for the whole week, as well. And it really lets them have this kind of experience. And then how do we ride the lift? It's a very important part of the skiing. You have to be able to get up the mountain to ski down it. So, having a little extra height from the outriggers can really help push your kind of seat up. It kind of locks in an upper position. So in this situation, it can actually be how you can help
Here comes one.
to help lift that up over the bench. And thankfully, we have some wonderful people that can help physically too. But if you don't have that help, really, it's a lot of your own stability, things like that. So you really need that kind of additional height. So really making sure you get the right arm bend can be really important. And then, we talked a lot about a lot of our spinal cord injuries, but another great population that might lose this, what, I call a little bit of loss of proprioception, is for our patients that actually is actually a double amputee. So, that's another really great population for kind of a sit ski as well. Might not, wounds, things like that. You might not be able to tolerate that kind of up position. This would be a great option. And this participant actually has gone before. So this was, I think, first day. He was already kind of going by himself. And so doing very, very well. And it can show you just about 5 days the previous time. You can pick it up quite quickly, have a lot of freedom to really start off at your level. as well, which is really great. And then this is one of our amputees. He actually a new amputee from last year, kind of in the fall. So very, very recent. This trip was back in like March. So you're thinking about within about 6 months, he was already back on the slopes. And he had skied for a long time in his life. I was really worried that he might not be able to ski again. But this is him kind of right off the bat. Doing
All right, yeah, no, I'm more worried about him.
And so that's Dr. Hamilton, kind of the background, if you can hear it, as well, just kind of talking. He did super well. I had to go with him like the second day because he was going to out ski me. And I wouldn't say I'm the world's best skier, but he was really doing super well. And so, you have a variety of patients, people that have skied before and people that have never skied before. And so it really opens you up to be able to follow these patients. And usually what we would do, Dr. Henke, Dr. Hamilton, we would pick someone kind of that morning and in the morning kind of follow them for the whole day as well. So a lot of different people and we kind of switched off. So we had medical assistants throughout the mountain with different people as well. If you needed it, hopefully not, but it was just a really great opportunity. And then this was just a funny part, you can have all the fun on the mountain, but sometimes you
Right. No, there's a thicker. There's a thicker.
How many degrees does it take to get up there?
Look, like I can see your whole foot here.
And you can hear Dr. Hamilton in the background just saying how many degrees does it take to get a boot off because it took quite a few and it took much longer than this video will show to get this boot off. This is Dr. Hinkie. I don't know if he's at it. I can't really see who's started, but hopefully he's on as well. But he was very, very kind to help get this boot off. But it was a work in progress and just the way the prosthetic sets up, yeah, it's, this equipment, there's certain things you can't always account for right off the bat. You can get a prosthetic like feet that are made for skis and different things too. Usually not covered by insurance, very expensive, definitely for newer amputations. You're not thinking kind of, oh, let's do that right off the bat. You're really just trying to fit a socket. You're really just trying to get people walking and moving and doing well. So some of the adaptive sports, even though it was already on the mountain, maybe haven't quite thought about all those other little factors that kind of go into it. So kind of just troubleshooting a little bit on the mountain, which was always quite fun. And then this is one of our prosthetists. So they were making adjustments in real time. So it was a really nice thing that was available. Uh, for everyone. So every patient that was on the trip, we had two prosthetists. They were switching off, they were covering other people that they don't typically work with, and they really brought a lot of tools to really set our athletes up for success. And we're so thankful that we have that opportunity, and we're very thankful for the groups to help be able to send them. It really sets people up, and this is a very new environment, very different environment. So you definitely need some adjustments, and so it really allowed for success. And then this is kind of a snow slider. So when I was talking about how do we adapt for people that can stand ski, but maybe need a little bit extra balance and different things. So this is actually a type of equipment that uses the metal frame with skis mounted on the outside to allow people with skis in the inside. It creates kind of like a walker style frame.
You ready?
It lets you kind of slide and then you can see how our guides are really important because they're really doing the pizza, the thing that's kind of slowing this person down and kind of helping not necessarily steer with the tethers, but really kind of help the speed so that allows the athlete to really work on that control because they're having difficulty moving or adjusting that limb, moving the hips that are really important for turning.
You ready?
And then this is two of our athletes. Very great thing. They like to climb.
We were waiting for you guys to race down.
So you can see that kind of community that we're talking about, which is really important, and it kind of is built on the mountain. It's kind of an experience you wouldn't really have before. And so this is our Bumsy crew. So Dr. Hinkie, Dr. Hamilton, and I. They had an afternoon off, so we kind of went out and skied and stuff, and really had just a wonderful time. Very thankful as well. And then that's kind of the finishing of my part. I ran a little bit over time. I apologize, but I'll scoot back for Dr. Hinke's part.
Hey, really appreciate that, Mason. Thanks for covering us while I was handling some other things.
Of
Hey, I
course.
appreciate everybody being on. I know that the time does say till 7 p.m. I don't know if you want me to continue or make this another talk. That's kind of up to you, I guess, Jenny or Chris. Um, but more than
Yeah.
happy to take questions as well if we need to.
This is being recorded, so if you want to, continue, if people need to head out, they can catch the rest of it on our YouTube.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah.
Sure. Mason, you don't mind hanging around and being my next slide guy?
I got you.
All right. Hey, yeah, so it was an absolute blast taking Dr. Tincher on for the trip, but I did want to zoom back out for anybody that's getting into the adaptive sports world, and potentially look at how medical providers can assist even if you don't get to go. Obviously, taking care of all of the acute issues moving forward during the trip is the easiest part, the first aid kit, etc. Calling 911 in our case. But speaking from some experience here, when you have an adaptive athlete coming into your office and talking about what the things they want to do, whether it's getting back to skiing or traveling the world or anything like that, first things first is medical clearance, some pending medical evaluations. For example, I had a case where I had a multiple sclerosis patient, clearly some foot drop that made them a candidate for an adaptive event, and found that they had a compression fracture in their cervical spine and they were about to go skiing. And no one had addressed it. He ended up with a kyphoplasty and had been held out of that event. So definitely room for medical providers as well. Imaging review on that component, as well as precautions, both cardiac and spine precautions to look towards. Even some folks will try to sneak on with a cast or a splint of some kind, and it's worth looking at. Additionally, depending on the adaptive athlete event, if it's a true competition, there are some medications that are super common in these athletes that are actually against the rules. You can imagine in a shooting event, propranolol or a beta blocker that's supposed to be slow your heart rate can actually help make it easier to shoot, and you don't have that heart thumping in your ear. As well as medication management for my folks that go overseas. A lot of medications are differently approved or not the same formulary. And it's worth making sure you have a full couple of months if the event's a long time, or a couple of weeks if it's a shorter time, just to make sure that if you do get stuck on the other side. So it's worth assessing there. And then equipment assessment. Sometimes my athletes have, duct taped sockets and different ways to apply a wheelchair, etc. And just making sure they not only their sports equipment but their regular equipment is up to date and ready to go. Next slide, please. Yeah, so when it comes to advising your athletes as you move forward, it's worth noting not only do you need the running blade or the hand cycle to get moving, but don't forget you do need your other devices in the spinal cord injury population. That could include things like a commode chair or transfer board. Some places are not as accessible as others, and making sure you have those things. Some of our athletes are reliant on microprocessor knees or power wheelchairs to move about in most settings. So make sure you have battery backup and that those batteries can charge in the right outlets. We've had some folks that end up across seas and they did not have the converter, and therefore they had to switch to their manual chair. And then finally, travel insurance on all of that is probably worth it. Most of us don't click that box and save a couple of dollars when we can. So yeah, definitely worth having a checklist for your athletes as you counsel them moving forward. Keep going. I wanted to show, when people get in our planes that you don't just get to roll in and move into the seat. It's not that easy. That there are specialized wheelchairs designed to get you down the seat, and in times, even with boarding procedures that have changed, these chairs are often not in the best condition, pretty hard surfaces, and with personnel that don't transfer people every day. So it definitely pays to have some advocacy. There's a lot of videos out there on how to transfer appropriately, especially in this setting, that you can give your patients to ensure that they don't have any pressure sores or fractures, just from transferring into an airplane. Couple of things that I think the next slide, but so don't go forward yet, but per the ACAA, there is not required to notify airlines that you're coming, even with a disability. For a lot of things, there's some caveats, but oftentimes the recommendations from many of the sites for disability is going ahead and notifying the airlines within 48 hours so they can have these type of transfers set up for you, mobility through the airport, and safety of your equipment. I think it's important to note that TSA screening does apply to our adaptive athletes as well. But you do have different similar rights to everybody else, private screening, and then you must explain your medical equipment. It's technically, you can have a doctor's note to prevent certain screenings as well, and those kind of things. So moving forward, I think the next slide has a little bit more about this. Yeah, these are these caveats to the ACAA that are out there. If you have a respirator of some kind, or a large group like we did have to go ahead and call out to the airlines and let them know we were coming, which I think is important as you guys set up your own groups moving forward and traveling. Next slide. So again, under the new ACAA guidelines, new aircrafts must have 30 seats that are movable armrests so that we can transfer in and out. I thought that one was the most interesting, as well as the accessible lavatory. I'm gonna have to start looking around and see how accessible some of these lavatories are and what it would take to get somebody in and out. On this last case, I shared an aisle with one of our athletes, and he ended up taking the window seat because he'd be last, while I took the aisle seat. But he did have to cath in the middle of it, so I just held up a towel and allowed him to do that. So rather than getting up and getting to the lavatories. Yep, next slide. So this happens on, I think, all three of these last trips, my time with the VA and recent times. And anytime you put any of your durable medical equipment under the plane, there is a risk of damage, whether it's just a brake falling off or spoke falling off. We had it as bad as missing a leg for a while. And I found this study. There's some caveats here. There's some biases here, but it's interesting that no airline is safe from having some issues. It is noted that now the policy is starting to change, that you do not want to walk outside the airport without making sure your complaint and report is filed with the airlines, because then there are ways that the airlines do not have to replace the equipment if you walk away from the airport at your destination. So we've gotten delayed a couple of times from our trip just to handle some of these mishaps. Next slide. Yeah, once you get there, some places outside of America do not have accessible taxis or ride shares, as well as rentable vehicles or buses. So while some countries may say they are accessible, make sure you justify what those are. The ADA does not apply to other countries. So you definitely have to do some digging. For us, we still ended up in the town of Crested Butte most recently, and there's still snow that gets up to 6 to 10 inches at times, and it takes a good shove to get over a curb every now and then. So it's good to take folks that can help and understand the plight of your athletes. That's why we showed up. We're just the taxis here. So, all right, next slide. Oh, was that it? Fantastic. Well, I appreciate everybody showing up. What questions do you have for me or really Dr. Tincher, because he's the best?
I had a question for you guys. So first of all, thank you so much for talking to us today about this. How did you guys find your way into adaptive sports? And as students, how could we get involved?
I can start. I'm just very lucky. I have some really great mentors in Dr. Henke and Dr. Hamilton that have really led the charge here at Baylor to really make this a priority. And I think one of the great things is Dr. Wilson, who's the CMO of Baylor, as well, has really made this a priority through all the levels. And so, because I think one of the things is they have realized is, you can't learn everything in the classroom. And sometimes you can't learn everything in an office. Some of these experiences are really only seen in certain circumstances. And so I think them having that kind of openness to letting and really prioritizing the residents, because this really sets us up to now know throughout my entire career, early on education is so important. And I think I just got really lucky because of I had great mentors that have really prioritized this. And so, but I think really seeking those kind of mentors out or programs or certain things, the resources that you have in your community, I think can be really useful. And then I think being part of this club sounds like it's a really great opportunity too, because it really opens your eyes to probably a lot of different adaptive sports, some farther away than others. But there's quite a few throughout Dallas, and Dr. Hinkie keeps us pretty in tune with all the little local pickleball events and everything for adaptive athletes. So really kind of finding doctors or other physicians as like a mentor and just asking them, is there any events that we could join? And I think that really sets you up to build a relationship to continue really working with that.
Yeah, and just to piggyback my 2 cents, as you guys further progress through your career, and I think it applies to anybody even outside the medical field. I was told that, if you like 20% of your job, don't like 40% and or are okay with 40% and don't like 20%, you're doing all right. And so when I found adaptive sports across my training, I realized that really just refuels me to do the rest. Some people are into advocacy or policy writing. Some people are into administration and whatnot on the structures of medicine. Some people are into the business of medicine, and that could be your 20% that keeps you going. In my case, it's getting to be involved in some of these athletic events. Fantastic question.
I have another quick question. First of all, thank y'all so much. I thought that was super, super interesting. Um, about these trips, like how often do they happen? And how do athletes get involved? How do they hear about it? And like, is this something, do they tell their friends and that's how you get signed up, or is there somewhere they can go?
Yeah, it's getting more and more formalized. Obviously, money for these things is the driving factor, but we have plans already to make it a biannual type of a trip, and whatnot. We will, within the Baylor community and with you guys, the coalition, we plan on continuing to expand and involve more and more folks.
And kind of with Dr. Hinkie, Dr. Hamilton, Dr. Wilson, all having a two of them having gait clinics and being really involved with SCI. I think that's how a lot of our population so far has been identified, somewhat on the inpatient to outpatient basis, just patients that they have known for a while. in a way can screen or vet a little bit too. Sometimes can be really useful. And then it is word of mouth too. But really, Dr. Hinkie, Dr. Hamilton, really prioritizing these opportunities to let people know during their visits, even though it's a short time, really trying to hit a more holistic view of health, not just, what we need to talk about at this visit, but other things that can be really important to people's overall life and satisfaction. A lot of the survey data really shows a lot of that I tried to highlight a little bit at the beginning. So I think that's really something we try to prioritize.
Awesome. Thanks.
Great presentation, guys. I'm a monoskier myself, so y'all brought to light a lot of things that I don't even think about. Me and some buddies have been skiing for over 10 years, so it's great to see this, and yeah, I'm going to piggyback some questions that Chris had, as far as how often y'all wanted to keep doing this or if it was going to be possible, because Donald knows me, going back a few years now, and I have a lot of athletes that come through my program that would love to get into that. If we would let them, because they're part of my program here. So skiing comes with some hazards. But I would love to open that up for them if they choose to. So I would love to keep up with you guys and see how things are going. So.
More the merrier, my friend. The more we can do proof of concept, the better we get a chance.
And also, I'm not an expert by all means, but if you guys need any sort of, advice or anything as far as someone that's been on the mountain a few times, I'm here to help. So
let's do it. I placed my email out there on the chat. I think you can see that. Let's link up. I know you as well, but I'm working towards creating a foundation so we can get a little bit more money moved faster than what it is currently. We have plans, like I said, to make it a biannual trip, make it even a summer trip out to Colorado. I eventually want to get into bringing adaptive scuba diving to DFW, if that makes sense. It's one of my favorite things that I've seen help the community and whatnot. So big plans to come, just early days.
Austin and Mason, this was really awesome. So thanks for giving that talk. One of the things that we've been talking about with the expo itself is just trying to really reach out to the patient population and the community a little bit more. Because a lot of times when we have these events, it's just the same people that come back rather than reaching out to new people. So I think this model that you have in terms of taking your patients and getting them to go on this trip is really cool. You touched upon it, Austin, but from the financial standpoint, what are some sources that you kind of reach out to financially support some of the participants? And then also, even if you're bringing staff with you, how does the hospital system, or how do you justify that to the hospital system?
Yeah, great question. Like Dr. Tincher mentioned previously, we have some major figureheads that are pro these type of things. Number one, we do have some of the typical volunteers in medicine, donation campaigns through Baylor that we've gotten some funding from. Number two, we typically try to represent our prosthetic companies. In this case, it was Henke and Autobach or Scott Sablich contributing. I think if we can, again, prove more and more proof of concept, we can invite more of those folks. I've even engaged in some of our botulinum toxin representatives for folks in chairs that may or may not have spasticity where that could affect how they sit. I think that could be a very good campaign to also get some funding that way. More so though, this last trip, we had some players here that actually are into a lot more funding and fundraising. So that again goes back to Dr. Hamilton and my dream to create a foundation so that again, it'll focus on the DFW adaptive sports world, bringing patients in and not letting them go. once they get the juice. So that's the dream. It's just early days. I'm only 2 years into the career, so yeah.
All right. Any
You.
last questions? If not, thank you again so much to Dr. Tincher and Dr. Henke for such an interesting, insightful talk and for sharing your time this evening. So if you guys want to add anything, if not, this concludes our session. And again, this will be uploaded to our YouTube, which Chris dropped into the chat. But it's also Adaptive Sports Coalition _ UTSW on YouTube. But thank you everyone for joining us tonight and have a great evening.